Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. I am your host, Christine Smith. And speaking of things that were not covered in music school, today we're going to explore some underrepresented composers from the country of Brazil. And here to take us on that journey and to guide us through some of the history and some of these wonderful composers is Flutist Guilherme Andreas. Now, Andreas has had a full and successful career as a soloist and a chamber musician that has taken him into major concert halls throughout Brazil and through countries in South America. He has won numerous awards and scholarships and has appeared in recitals, concerts, and presentations throughout the U.S. He's currently based in New York, where he dedicates his time to teaching and to discovering lesser-known composers whose music expresses extreme ranges of emotions and demands tremendous virtuosity. His debut album, Beyond Bossa Nova, explores the stories of romantic classical music from Brazil through the voices of composers of all races, genders, and orientations. So, Andreas, thank you for being here, and welcome to Musicians versus the World.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And thank you for introducing me to your wonderful album. I have enjoyed listening to that tremendously.
Oh, thank you for listening.
And I went back and looked at your biography, and something that made me laugh was that you served in the military that you said was the perfect preparation for being a musician. I would love to hear that story. Would you mind telling me a little bit about your background and your history?
Absolutely. So, responding to your question, I joined the Brazilian Marines in 2009. There was a national audition in Brazil, and there was one spot, and I got the spot. So at the time, I was in Brasilia, Brazil's capital, and then I moved to Rio de Janeiro to go through basic training, and eventually I was named principal flute with the Brazilian Marines, Wind Symphony, which was a group that I played with for 4.5 years, maybe, before I moved to the US. That got me ready for what I'm doing now in terms of basic training is very intense.
Yes.
Emotionally intense, physically intense. It's very demanding, right? Which is not very, very different from doing classical music. All the stress, all the complications, and, of course, they're completely different, worlds. But I would say that, it really got me ready for most of the things I'm doing right now. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And now you're in New York City. That must be so exciting and fun. Tell me a little bit about life as a musician there.
Yes, it's very exciting. New York has been a dream for a little bit. I remember I came here in 2015, the very first time. And New York was one of those places that when you come to a place and you feel the energy and the energy kind of matches your own energy. That was New York for me, in 2015. I was still in Virginia. And then I started thinking maybe I should move here at some point, but I had no money, it was very hard, So I started thinking about how I could move up here. And eventually I got a job here in 2019 to teach. And it's been very, very fun. Of course, now the city's coming back to what it was, because the COVID pandemic, it was very bad, especially for New York.
Yes,
the city was really shut down for a long, long time, and that, of course, it took the arts, the performing arts in general, in a very, very bad direction.
Mm-hmm.
It feels it will eventually come back to what it was before. There's a lot of music going on already. There's a lot of performing going on already. I've been performing as a flutist, but I also sing, so it's been very interesting. Mm-hmm. For instance, last July, I was singing at the Kennedy Center, the Lincoln Center, and we were singing Mozart's Requiem. So it was very interesting. So it's been very fun. Yeah, New York is great. I love living here.
Yeah. So what sort of performance opportunities have you found? You've been singing a lot, and I can imagine there are lots of opportunities for singers to perform. But what sort of opportunities have you found for the flute?
Yes. So mostly chamber music. I've been performing sometimes with a duo called Boy Meets Girl. So I've performed with them as well. I have performed mostly solo as well, flute and piano. I just had a recital 2 weeks ago. But this recital also, I had a trio, which was very uncommon, was saxophone, flute, and piano.
Oh.
Yes, and I performed last month as well. It was a recital all on Brazilian music as well, but this one was two guitars, a bass, and myself. It's been a lot of chamber music, mostly performances that I've been doing so far, and especially because I just released an album.
Well, with so many musicians in New York, I bet there's just so many opportunities to find different combinations of those chamber
Yes,
groups.
but there's so many people here as well,
That's true.
It's so overwhelming sometimes. So many great musicians, yes. And also because like there's so many schools here, so even like there's so many orchestras, there's so many schools, so it's a melting pot of like so many great people. But we still can, are able to do things here.
So tell me about this album. Congratulations on it, by the way.
Thank you so much.
What were your reasons for creating this? It's a huge job to record an album.
Wow, it is. I had no idea how hard this process is. It's a prize. At the end of it just feels like I don't know. I just feel I've done something for myself, but like that would be great to share with people. So it all started in 2015 when I was invited to give a lecture recital at Duke University. They do have a conference on Brazil every 2 years, I think so. And then, as far as I know, they were looking for a classical musician from Brazil that was based in the US. And someone found my playing on social media or something. And they asked me like, hey, would you like to play? And for us, your lecture would be a full recital. And then you would play like all classical music if you could. I was like, sure. So I started doing some research. There's a lot of repertoire for flute on Brazilian music, but it's not everything that's demanding in terms of like flute playing, or it's not. Sometimes I really like playing emotionally demanding pieces. And some of the flute pieces that we have in Brazil are not necessarily kind of the pieces that I was looking for. So I started doing some research. So what I'm saying is that, for instance, I'm very used to playing long pieces. Like, for instance, I love playing sonatas. I love playing the French sonata. I love playing the Prokofiev sonata for flute. I love playing, those, works that are like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I was looking for something that would be like that, or pieces that would have a story. So eventually I found all those pieces. And then after the recital, like how people react to it was like so great. And they were like so curious about the music. I started thinking like maybe I should do recording, So it was a long process anyways, because we started thinking about it, my pianist and myself, Gianne, of how we would do the whole thing. But then COVID came along as well, interrupted the whole process. But eventually that's the main reason why I did this whole project. Like each piece has a story. Each piece tells a story of the composer, the piece itself, and how the piece it speaks to me as a flutist, and then so that I can have a voice and speak to people as well.
Yeah, and that human connection that music does so well.
Yes, for me, it's literally about connecting the music that I'm making to anyone. It doesn't matter where they're coming from or what language they speak. To me, it's the connection is the most important factor,
And as a pianist, I have to appreciate that you chose pieces that had an interesting accompaniment.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And you're a pianist. She's just phenomenal as well.
She is amazing.
Yeah. And the two of you seemed so well connected at the same time.
Thank you so
You're really,
much.
Yeah, it was just lovely to listen to.
I appreciate you saying that because it was something that we really worked or try to work on.
Yeah. And that's a difficult thing to do, especially when you're recording, and you just did a beautiful job of that. And how can you explain what this sound is? It's different than anything I've heard. It's lovely.
Thank you.
But how would you describe Brazilian classical music?
So my main goal was to showcase composers from Brazil that were born before Villa-Lobos. So, or after. Composers that wrote beautiful music, but are not very well known because Villa-Lobos is like so prolific.
Right.
Whenever people think of Brazilian classical music, they usually think of Villa-Lobos, right? Bachianas 5, which I also recorded. Or even other pieces in terms of flute repertoire, we think of Bachianas 6, which is for flute and bassoon. Or Chorus number 2, which is for flute and clarinet. Or maybe Bachianas number 1, which is for cellos, like a group of cellos. But there's more, like there's so many more people, So for instance, the sonata. So I recorded this sonata, which is the sonata in A major. It's 4 movements. It's absolutely romantic in terms of European romantic music. So each one of those movements, it's very, very clear. The composer, his name was Leopoldo Miquez. 4 movements, they're very distinct, but they're very well written. In each one of them, you can tell there's some influence by someone. The first movement, you could tell that he was influenced by Brahms. The second movement, you can tell because it's so chromatic. You can tell it's influenced by Wagner. The third movement, there's some very interesting, especially in the piano. There's so many interesting things. You can literally tell he was influenced by Liszt. But there is a fugue in the middle of the third movement, which is very romantic fugue, like things that you can listen like in Brahms, Requiem, or, And then on the fourth movement, you can clearly tell he was copying César Franck. And the story is actually that he published the music when César Franck published his violin sonata. So the sonata that I recorded was published in 1896. Also the same year that César Franck published his violin sonata. Around that time, Brahms was publishing his violin sonata number 3 or 2, if I'm not mistaken. Saint-Saëns was publishing one of his violin sonatas too. So, there was a lot of people publishing romantic sonatas.
It's a big year.
Exactly. And Leopoldo Miquez was forgotten. Why? The reason why, there's many, theories, but he was basically forgotten. He was living in Paris, actually, when he wrote his sonata. And he studied with Debussy's professor, So he was literally being influenced by many of those composers. Leopoldo Miquez, he was born in Rio, in Niterói, which is a city outside of Rio de Janeiro. And his father was from Spain. So that's why his name sounds, Spanish. He was a very prolific composer as well in Brazil. And he was sponsored by the emperor in Brazil. At the time, Brazil was an empire because Brazil was colonized by Portugal. There's a lot of history behind that too. So he was sponsored by the emperor to go to Europe, to study in Paris. So that's why, and actually when this sonata was published, it was actually published in Germany. He was also friends with Grieg. He was friends with many other composers, it's so interesting. Or even around the same time, there's another piece that I recorded. It's called Oriental. In Portuguese, it means from the east, right? So this piece is like very, I don't like this word, but I'm going to use it. It sounds very exotic. And, on the flute, like there was a flute cadenza in the, and it was written by this composer called Pattapio Silva. And he was a Black flutist he was born in 1870. So there's a lot of history behind that too.
Yeah.
Because, he was a free guy. He was a Black guy when slavery in Brazil was ending. And he was a free Black flutist and he was successful. He was a flutist. He was a virtuoso on the flute. He published his music, which for that time, it was I mean, even nowadays, getting your music published is such an accomplishment, right? Can you tell a Black flutist in 18, I don't know, 90 or something,
Yeah.
Publishing his music. And he was also going to be sponsored by the emperor to go to Europe and play in Europe, but he died very early. So he was a contemporary of, like, for instance, we now are like talking so much about Black composers and, like, any other composers. He was a contemporary of Samuel Taylor from England, right? He was a Black composer in England. Silva was a Black composer in Brazil. And he was a successful Black composer. It's a huge accomplishment. So each piece has a history behind, there's a history about the composer. There's some history about the piece, some stories about the piece and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I love hearing the history behind the composers because it brings so much to the music. And I think it brings so much to our understanding as performers and as listeners as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there a specific composer that you feel like you connected with, or a piece that you connected with the most?
I think all of them, honestly. There are two that, I'm not going to lie, there are two that they're very special to me. One is Nostalgia by this composer called Jose Siqueira. There is a story behind that too. So he was a prolific composer in Brazil. But Brazil, at the time, Brazil was going through the military, what is it called? Dictatorship. And he was called a communist spy.
Oh.
So he had to be exiled, and he was exiled in Russia. Even most of his pieces now, most of his works, the title is still in Russian. And he wrote this piece. It's a very short piece, but it's very emotional. The melody is very beautiful. The harmony, the progression, is very beautiful. The piano, I love the piano part. I'm not gonna lie. But he wrote this music because he was missing Brazil. Like, he was longing. That's why the title is called Nostalgia. He was like, there was this longing. There was this, like, we have a word in Portuguese that's called saudade. That means that you're longing for something that you can't have anymore. So anyways, he wrote this music and he died in 1985. And the dictatorship in Brazil ended in 1986. So he never got to go back.
He never went back.
Yes.
Wow.
So it's very sad. Like, when I tell this story in my recitals, people cry. And then when I play the music, because we all are, like, missing something or someone, like a place that we left behind or someone that, And then the other piece is the last song, which it's the last song of my album, but the title is literally the last song. So this is a work written by Clarice Assad, or Clarice Assad, how people would say. She lives in Chicago. She's Brazilian as well. Of course, she's alive, right? So she wrote this music for Yo-Yo Ma. Yo-Yo Ma has 2 albums only on Brazilian music, featuring Brazilian music. And one of them has this piece. And when I heard him play, I was like, I have to play this. I don't know who wrote it. I'm going to find out. And I was asking people, I was like, who wrote this? So I found out it was Clarice. So I emailed her. And this story is very special to me because, like, to this day, I'm still, like, overwhelmed with it. Because I wrote to her, I was like, where, or, like, how can I buy this music? And I can transpose it for myself and do the arrangement, whatever, because I write as well. And she called me. And she was like, hey, do you want me, like, to do the transcription? I was like, oh my God, Clarice Assad is calling me. I can't believe this. And she was like, oh no, I'm going to send the music to you. I didn't pay for it. Don't tell anyone. So she sent me the music, and I recorded it. It's very emotional. The melody is very beautiful. The harmony is very beautiful too. Like, the way she wrote the piano part, and it's very romantic. I wanted to include it, not because it's like from the romantic period per se, but because it just sounds like neo-romantic. Yeah, so those pieces are like to the, they really like get me.
Well, we've had performers and composers come and talk about underrepresented composers before. And I always ask this question, and it's a hard one, but why should we pay attention to these composers? What is it about them that make it so important that we actually know them?
I would say that the main thing is that, music is a language. We all know this, and we all express ourselves through it, right? And sometimes we use words, and in my case, I don't, because I'm playing my flute, right? And usually with piano. And I just feel those composers, historically speaking, they're underrepresented. They're usually people of color. They're either, as we say now, they're either black, they're either brown, and then we go into gender. They're either gay, they're either, trans or anything. Usually, those people have a life of struggles, and those struggles are translated into the music that they produce. And I think that one of the things, if I may say, one of the things is that why we should listen to their music is because they're portraying their struggles through their music. And because music is a language and we are here to communicate that language to everyone, and because of struggles make us human and makes us more compassionate and more connected to each other. So I do think that that will be one of the reasons why we should listen to composers of, underrepresented composers, because of their struggles are being said. They're being told through their music. And as we listen to their music, we'll listen to their struggles as well, and then we're being more connected to ourselves and other people and, more human. I would say that.
Great answer. Fantastic. You said that you arranged some of these pieces.
Yes.
How was that process? I mean, especially you did a Villa-Lobos arrangement. That is a beautiful piece. Did you feel any weight to that? I mean, it's a great undertaking.
Yes, absolutely. Especially for that one.
Yeah.
Because it's also so overdone, if I may say. There's so many recordings of it and so many people, not only flutists or singers, like any instruments really, have done this. There's so many recordings of like, cellos, violins, whatever, violas, right? Everything. So yes. And it was very, I could say like, I could feel like the pressure of like making sound very close to what Villa-Lobos wanted. My concern was literally because like his arrangement, I don't know if you know this, but he has an arrangement for voice, maybe, or flute and piano, but it doesn't really translate what he wrote for the group of cellos. So the whole counterpoint that he writes, especially on the bass, boom, 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 do 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 do. That's not written on his arrangement for piano. Like, this is the main thing. Like, why he didn't write this? So it's literally just the bass is just octaves. It's just boom, 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 boom. That was my main concern because, like, the beauty of the whole piece is how he mixed up Brazilian folk music to Bach. All his technique.
Right.
His arrangement didn't have that. It was like, what? We were not trying to imitate the group of cellos, but we were trying to translate the idea as best as we could.
Right.
So there was a lot of, on her part especially, some technique on like how to play the bass and how to play, the inner voices, in order to support the flute. And in my case, how I could play in ways that you could not necessarily imitate the soprano, but it could flow so musically, on top of the piano part that actually would really translate his idea. especially when I have the middle part.
Yeah.
When the soprano finally has lyrics, how I could, as a flutist, translate something that's literally has a message, because the whole it doesn't have lyrics. So it's just, the singer is one instrument on top of the other instruments. How once she has lyrics, she has a poem. How can I actually translate that? So that was a challenge. I'm not gonna say that I had the answer for it, but I tried my best. But it was a lot. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, besides the writing part, it was a lot of conversation between myself and my pianist. How can we do this? And that was the hardest piece to record. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yes, it was very complicated.
Yeah, we started recording that piece, and then it didn't work. There was something off, and eventually we find out that like one of the notes on the piano was not completely in tune. It was throwing me off, and so like the piano wasn't out of tune, but because the bass is so present, there was something in my ears that was not making sense at all. So we had to retune the piano. We did the recording another day. So it was very, yes. So because we were like trying as much as we could to bring or translate Villa-Lobos' idea as best as we could. So, that was a very complicated piece. Like, people think that's very easy to play that piece, but it isn't. It
didn't sound too easy. Well, he did it well. It really came across really well. So I congratulate you on that. That sounded like it took a lot of effort and a lot of collaboration.
Yeah. That was a chamber music piece, that's for sure.
If people are wanting to find this or to find you or want to connect with you or come and watch you, how do people find you?
The main thing would be my website. So my website is just my name, Guilherme, Andreas, Andreas.com. You'll find all the information there. Or I'm also on social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I'm not on Twitter, and I don't have TikTok.
And that's all under your name?
Yes. My Instagram is Andreas, Guime. So if you type Andreas, just, you'll find me. Besides Andreas from the Berlin Phil, there is me.
And then your album is just streaming, so you can just get it anywhere you can get music.
Yes.
And so as we finish up, what advice do you have for new or aspiring musicians?
That's a great question. I would say get yourself ready to doing things outside music. We are musicians, but we're still people. We're still humans, and we get to get connected to people. I love the way Brené Brown talks about some things. And one of the things that she says is that we are designed to be connected. We were designed for connection. So I think as musicians, we should try our best to be connected. Our music is not relevant if we are not connected. That's my opinion. So as much as we can, be connected to other people, to a community, or, it makes such a difference in life, especially as we go along. And, now I sound super old, but I would say that, it's very, very important not to be by yourself. I'm not saying that you shouldn't find, some solitude. That's not what I'm saying. But, making your music relevant by being connected. So it's one of the things that I would say that's extremely important.
That's great. That's fantastic advice. Yeah. And I think music is just another way for us to connect. So yes. And I have enjoyed connecting with you today.
Thank you so much.
And meeting you and getting to know you and hearing the stories behind your music. I loved it before I knew the stories. And now I'm going to go listen to it again now that I know all the background. And I'm going to truly enjoy it even more on a whole other level. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So flutist Guilherme Andreas, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. And I hope everyone enjoyed hearing a little bit about myself and my work as well.
Thank you for joining us today on the Musicians vs. the World podcast in our discussion with flutist Guilherme Andreas as we discussed underrepresented Brazilian composers. You can find out more about Andreas and his album Beyond Bossa Nova on his website guilhermeandreas.com. I will have links to his website as well as to his social media and his album in our show notes on our website at frostedlens.com/musicians versus the world. If you were as inspired by this conversation as I was, please share this episode with friends, family, or students that may benefit from it. And please leave us a nice review wherever you listen to podcasts so others can find us as well. Musicians vs. the World is a production of Frosted Lens Entertainment in conjunction with Smith Sound Music. It is hosted and edited by me, Christine Smith, and our producer today is Russ Wilkes. In today's episode, you've heard excerpts of Sonata in A Major, Opus 14, by Leopoldo Miquez, Oriental by Pattapio Silva, Nostalgia by Jose Siqueira, Last Song by Clarice Assad, and Bachianas No. 5 by Heitor Villa-Lobos, arranged by Guilherme Andreas. All pieces were performed by Andreas on the flute and Gianne on piano, and were shared with permission. Join us next time where we'll look into the world of collaboration and composing with award-winning musician and composer Pat Irwin as we discuss his process in composing music for the hit series Dexter: New Blood. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any future conversations. If you have any questions for us, topics you'd like to hear about, or any helpful advice for other musicians that you'd like to share, be sure to reach out on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, or send us an email at info@frostedlens.com. Thanks so much.